Kaitlyn. First up, I'd just like to thank the lead dev team for inviting me here today. It's really an honor to be up on this stage amongst so many wonderful speakers, and I've been having a great time. As Tanya said, I'm a staff software engineer at a company called Farewell, where I work closely with a lot of other software engineers. Actually, I shouldn't say a lot, only a few compared to how big some of your companies are, but a lot of my friends also happen to be software engineers. And I've noticed a few things most of us have in common. We really like playing board games. The nerdier, the better. Just an example. A couple examples. Okay, I might have gone a little overboard. This is almost there. Okay, yeah. We spend a lot of time learning new things. And then we immediately forget them once we move on to something new, so we have to look things up over and over again. The things we learn and the things we build all require us to use computers. You might find a software engineer who doesn't like playing board games, but you have a pretty hard time finding one who doesn't use computers. A lot of our work involves taking a vague request or complaint and distilling it into an actionable query. We love Boolean operators and hold some unreasonably strong opinions about database design. And of course, all the software engineers I know document their work assiduously. Right? We all do that. Of course we do. It's very important. Okay, maybe not. We don't do that, do we? So let's talk about that for a minute. Often when we talk about documentation, we talk about why it's hard or why people don't bother with it. Maybe you or the people you work with don't know how to write good documentation. Or it takes too much time. Or it's too hard to maintain, so why bother? These are all variations on the same theme. We don't see the value, so we don't prioritize it. Or maybe you have the opposite problem, too much documentation. You're buried under a growing mountain of technical specs and strategy docs. No one is sure which are outdated and which aren't. But one thing is certain. You can never find just what you need when you need it. It's hard to know which is worse, too much or not enough, and harder still to find the right balance. It's a problem of discoverability, too. You know there's an architecture diagram somewhere, but the VP needs to show it to the board today. So it's faster just to make a new one, even though you know it won't be as good. It's time to call for help from the professionals. Professional librarians, that is. As it turns out, librarians have a lot in common with software engineers. The main difference is that even entry-level librarian jobs require a master's degree in library science. Librarians spend years doing specialized training, learning how to organize information to make it easily accessible. Long before I was a software engineer, I was a librarian at the San Diego Zoo. I did my library degree approximately 1 million years ago, straight after university, back when I was young and impressionable and didn't quite realize how hard it would be to make rent and a car payment on an assistant librarian's salary, or how easy it might be to become a software engineer instead. I've been an engineer now for longer than I was a librarian, but I still have a librarian's heart, passionately idealistic, but fueled by a tiny kernel of rage. I also have a librarian's brain, which means that when faced with something like this, I feel an overwhelming urge to turn it into this, or this. Shortly after I started with Farewell, I created this wiki. Over a couple of years, we've seen firsthand how having a well-structured knowledge base can help teams make better technical decisions. By writing good docs, technical leaders and specialists can scale their influence, just as James described in his talk yesterday. Making those docs easy to find broadens their reach. It's really a much more pleasant way to work. My library science degree took 2 years. We obviously don't have that kind of time today, so I've distilled the relevant bits into a few simple steps to help you improve your approach to documentation. Hopefully, over the next 20 minutes or so, I can inspire you and empower you to make things better, easier to find what you're looking for when you're looking for it. The first step, as usual, is to take a backup. You may be making significant structural changes to your team's existing documentation, so being able to roll back is essential. If you're starting from scratch, Notion is a pretty good tool right now. It's what I've used for most of my examples now, but I'll go into more about choosing a tool a bit later on. If you're already using something else, you can stick with that, of course, but back it up first. Seriously. Assess the docs you already have. You might have a pretty good wiki already, or you might have a chaotic jumble of Google Docs piled up on a shared drive somewhere. You need to be selective in your sorting. Not everything will make it into your wiki. Having too much documentation is a maintenance burden. Things get out of date. Duplicate content proliferates. Your wiki should focus on evergreen content, the essentials for engineers working with your product or service. You can think of your wiki as a reference library, metaphorical shelves full of authoritative sources of reliable, durable information. When you find high quality or high potential content for your wiki, set it aside. Your wiki pile should include anything that you refer back to often. But what about everything else? A lot of the documentation and organization amasses might take the form of digital ephemera. These are things like important emails, training calls, product walkthroughs, sequence diagrams, decision trees, ERDs. You might also have working docs, notes, project kickoff briefs, meeting minutes. These can pile up quickly and represent a slice-in-time view of a project. Digital ephemera and working docs are part of your organization's archive. Docs like these should be distinct from your primary wiki content, but can still be useful for answering questions later on. An archivist is a special kind of librarian, one with expertise in wrangling lots of different primary sources in collections called archives. Archives can contain all kinds of materials, from plain old documents to strange, hard-to-catalog objects and ephemera. These photographs, for example, are from the Coca-Cola corporate archive. When an archivist begins a job, they sift through these materials and document them in something called a finding aid. I'll talk a bit later about how you might create a finding aid to make it easier to look for things in your archive. Everything else can go in the bin. Okay, just kidding, sort of. It's not nice to delete other people's stuff, of course. But if you're starting with a lot of bin quality content, you might be better off starting from scratch. And if you come across docs that are so outdated or inaccurate that it would actually be harmful or counterproductive for someone to read them, flag them for deletion. Now that you've got a nice selection of potential wiki content, it's time to create your taxonomy. Taxonomy, beloved by librarians and object-oriented programmers alike, is the practice of classifying information in an orderly way, nesting classes beneath broader categories. By introducing a taxonomy, you can impose order and structure on the available documentation, making it easier to find what you're looking for. We'll go from this to this. At Farewell, I started by sifting through the existing docs and sorting related pieces of content into buckets. I looked to see what patterns emerged. That's how we ended up with the people and collaboration headings in our wiki. We had a lot of great evergreen documentation covering those areas already. The primary sections of your wiki reflect your priorities. The content will expand over time to take the shape you create, so be deliberate in your choices here. Even though we didn't have a lot of existing content related to testing, I added a top-level heading for it. I did this with the hope that we would create more documentation about testing processes and to indicate the relative importance of testing to our engineering practices. We have a content gap around QA testing, so I added a stub to serve as a reminder that we're missing a documented QA process. I had a lot of questions about our infrastructure when I started. As those questions were answered, I documented what I learned in our wiki. You'll notice that I seeded the wiki with a top-level heading for infrastructure. I might have considered grouping it under codebase, but in this case, I wanted to encourage the creation of more infrastructure-related docs by other engineers. And this worked really well. Other engineers contributed high-quality docs in this category, which are used frequently. Your wiki will expand over time. When thinking of ideas for what to add, reflect on the type of questions you have in a typical day on the job. See what sort of things are raised by recent joiners or more junior people. Think of the docs you'd like to see, or the ones you plan to write, or the ones you see coming up a lot in conversation, or the ones you have written down but always have to refer back to. You'll end up with a list of topic headings. These headings should be roughly the same level of abstraction and importance with any subheadings ordered beneath. This list is your wiki's taxonomy. Next, you can make your style more consistent. Librarians and software engineers both love consistency, and a little style goes a long way. Pages should be clearly structured with headings informed by your taxonomy. You can use emoji to make the page titles easier to scan and more fun to look at. And you can add other elements like images, subheadings, and section dividers to create some subtle visual emphasis. Consider your writing style too. To enhance readability, try to break long articles into shorter, easier to scan chunks when you can. For topics that are too complex to fit into one short article, we group related pieces of content together. The incident response page of our wiki describes what to do when something goes wrong. Even in the heat of the moment, it should be easy to navigate to that page, figure out where you are in the process, and understand what to do next. When docs are sequential, use links to guide the reader through. You can provide contributing guidelines to help your teammates feel confident making changes or adding new pages. Having good content isn't enough, of course. Once you have it, you need to be able to find it again. Luckily for you, librarians are experts at making things easy to find. As I mentioned earlier, the main output of an archivist's work is a finding aid. The finding aid includes a detailed inventory of each item in the collection. By indexing your digital ephemera and working docs in a finding aid, you can make them available to future users of your organization's archive. I like to use Notion databases to organize working docs for future reference. For example, we create post-incident reviews after an incident, then archive them in a searchable database, which is now automated by Incident.io. So a little bit defunct, this image, but principle stands. And the same is true of proposals, meeting minutes, and other docs of that nature. Searchable is a key criteria here. Searching can be a great way to find what you're looking for quickly and efficiently, so it's worth your time to make sure your wiki content is easily searchable. Just like meta tags on websites give extra context to aid search engines, we can include metadata to make searching for images, video, and other non-text content easier. You can use AI-powered tools like Descript or ICO to automatically transcribe video and audio content. Including a transcript will make these materials come up in search results and make them more accessible, even if the transcription isn't perfectly accurate. Library catalogs list subject headings to make materials easier to find. Journal articles include keywords to enhance findability. It's worth doing the same for your most valuable or frequently referenced bits of documentation to make sure they'll be surfaced in search results. But full-text search isn't a replacement for good information architecture. You don't want to rely on it exclusively. With some tools, indexing can be slow, or their search algorithms are weighted poorly. Search can break. Your mission, to make information easy to find, is too valuable to rely on any one strategy. A bit of redundancy in this system is healthy to ensure reliability. Your main wiki content should have a sensible information architecture so that you can find important docs easily without having to search for them. If you don't already have a wiki, you might be wondering where to start with choosing a tool. I'll make it easy on you. Just get a free Notion account. There was a time a couple of years ago when Notion struggled to keep pace with their growth. Search results took ages to return, weren't as relevant as they should have been, and new pages could take hours to get indexed. You'll be happy to hear they've fixed all those problems and added a lot of new wiki-specific features like page ownership and verification. In the past, I've used GitHub Wiki. GitHub Wiki is just Git under the hood, hosted on GitHub, which has benefits and drawbacks. It's nice to have your wiki co-located with your codebase if you're using GitHub. And GitHub search has gotten a lot better recently. But my big problem with GitHub Wiki is the lack of referential integrity across pages. If you link to a page by the title and then change the title of that page, all the links are broken. In contrast, Notion is great at this, so the moving things around and organizing phase of creating your wiki becomes a lot easier with a tool like Notion. Oh, I forgot to switch slides. You all know what GitHub Wiki looks like. You might already be using something like Google Docs and think of using that for your wiki. Ultimately, the wiki you have is better than the one you don't. So if that's the only way to get started, then go for it. But I'd caution against that if you're starting from scratch. Ironically, the search on Google Drive is almost unusably bad. Sorry to all the Googlers. A lot of people I spoke with yesterday here at Lead Dev and StaffPlus are using Confluence. I added this slide last night. This tool seems to be more popular for large organizations that have already bought into the full Atlassian product suite. So if you're using it, you might be stuck with it. I've never used it myself, but from what I've heard, it sounds like their search engine has a heavy weighting towards recency. So if you're using Confluence, you might have to rely even more heavily on good information architecture and using a range of strategies to improve searchability. Whatever tool you use, it needs to be collaborative. Your wiki is most valuable when it captures the collective knowledge of your entire organization. The more contributors, the better. Building this momentum takes time. You can start small, but you should start soon. Share your wiki one-on-one with a few trusted collaborators. Ask for help identifying content gaps or reviewing new docs you've written. See if your reviewers agree with the taxonomy you created. As you solicit feedback, try to gauge interest among your colleagues. You're looking to find those early champions, contributors who are keen to get involved and help you build your collective knowledge base. Trust in the process. It can take some time for everyone to see the value, but there are a few ways you can help things along. When you answer a question using the wiki, show your work. How did you find the answer? When you learn something new from a colleague, update the docs to reflect your learnings. This ensures the knowledge is documented and illustrates for your colleagues how easy it can be to contribute to the wiki. If you see a discussion happening, and there's a relevant doc in the wiki, you can join things up by dropping the link into the conversation. Anyone reading later will be able to follow that thread to the documentation to learn more. In other words, channel your inner librarian. Docs are most useful when everyone can self-serve to answer questions. But for that to work, people have to know about your wiki and believe it can help. Show people how useful a tool it can be to inspire them to reach for it too. A great way to do outreach is by pairing. It's not just for code. Teaching people how to create effective documentation is a force multiplier to level up communication skills across your organization. Writing and maintaining documentation is a core part of everyone's job. To the extent you have influence on promotion criteria at your organization, improving docs should be a contributing factor for advancement. Cultivate a sense of ownership among your team for parts of the wiki that align with their interests. Try to enlist help keeping things tidy and up to date. Once you build up a culture of documentation excellence, you have a repository for institutional knowledge, make onboarding easier for new joiners, and ensure no irreplaceable knowledge is lost when someone leaves. It's only 6 steps. If you can time box a day or two to set up your wiki, you can get through this whole process in one go. But if that doesn't seem doable, there's still a lot of value in breaking it up into smaller chunks and doing a bit here and there. If you find yourself on call, for example, or anticipating interruption, as Maud described yesterday, this is great work to pick up in that type of situation. Making improvements to documentation, even small iterative improvements, can pay huge dividends if you focus on solving the right problems. Focus on documenting the things that can't easily be inferred by looking at the code. Explain why things were done in a certain way and how decisions were made. These are the things that can't be reverse engineered and can solve mysteries down the line. Here's an example I can share that puts some of those principles into practice. I attended the Lead Dev conference in London last year. One talk in particular contained some ideas that I thought might help with the challenges I perceived at Farewell at the time. So when I got back to work, I drafted a proposal describing the experiment I wanted to run. I reached out to one of my teammates, Helena Thompson, to see if she would be up for pairing on the idea. Luckily for me, she agreed. We created some supporting docs, including the all-important flowchart, and made our pitch. The aim was to revitalize the way the team discussed and documented technical implementation approaches and architectural decisions. This has been incredibly successful. Several of my colleagues have used the word transformational. A few other choice quotes include incredibly valuable, massive impact on my personal development, and of course, you can do your screaming in a more informed manner. A few factors contributed to the success, but chief among them, we've spent the past couple of years building a culture of documentation excellence, so reading and writing docs like this isn't an undue burden on our engineers. Here's another small example of how building a culture of documentation has made our jobs a bit easier. Earlier this year, Farewell applied for regulation of a new product offering. Part of the regulatory process required us to have rigorously documented procedures around software development and security. I was off on parental leave whilst this was happening, but the new docs featured prominently in the wiki. They bear a strong resemblance to documentation that was already there, but now we have an officially sanctioned process, which is great. My final example is a cautionary tale. Remember this? Yeah, it's not great. I created this stub when I first set up our engineering wiki to remind me to go back and fill in the documentation around QA processes once I learned a bit more about how they work at Farewell. I never went back and did this because, as it turned out, we didn't have much of a QA process. Engineers test their own code changes, and product teams will test larger changes together in an ad hoc manner. There are no documented product flows or test plans. These are some excerpts from a post-incident review from earlier this year. One of our product teams made some great improvements to an older part of our code base. Unfortunately, the rollout of this work missed some QA steps. Since we don't have any documented QA process, this didn't come as much of a surprise. The issues we missed seemed small, but had a significant commercial impact to our business. One of the learnings recorded in the post-incident report is that we should have tested the work better during review. But a lack of QA rigor is a structural problem, not something that's the onus on individual engineers. And in this case, it was a problem I already knew existed, but just hadn't gotten around to doing anything about yet. That was a bit of a wake-up call. So the risk of not having the right documentation can be significant. But you don't know if you have the right documentation until you really take stock of what you have and what you think you need. If you take just one thing from this talk, sort through your existing documentation, see what you're missing, and make a plan to fill in some of the gaps before they come back to bite you in the ass. We heard a lot from the speakers up here yesterday about how to tackle the rocks, those chunky projects that require some serious organizational buy-in. Overhauling your documentation can be a project like that, if you can get it prioritized, but it can also be a pebble that you just pick up from time to time. Block off some time in your calendar to make a start. Don't be afraid to take some shortcuts, and be ruthless in prioritizing how you spend your time. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It will never be perfect. A good wiki is a living document, evolving with each new contribution. Strive for continual improvement, and try to leave everything better than you found it. My challenge to you is this. Can you start now? If you don't have a wiki already, make an empty page and add your first doc today. Best of luck. Feel free to let me know how you get on. Thank you.